When I heard late this afternoon that Bill Barr was resigning or was fired, it's kind of unclear what exactly happened. But apparently the relationship between him and President Trump was fraying over the last few weeks with his refusal to kind of say, we stand with you. We think the election has been rigged, and following that whole narrative. So he's gone 37 days until the inauguration. So I just wanted you to kind of brief everybody on the tenure of William Barr, how you would assess it, and what happens now.
Well, I would assess the tenure of William Barr with one word: disgrace. I think he will go down easily as the worst attorney general in our lifetimes, perhaps ever. He really defiled our proud Justice Department, which is our crown jewel. I've got to work there twice, and the career men and women who are there are just extraordinary, and they do things in a non-political way, which I know in this day and age seems so quaint. I mean, I remember, one of my mentors, David Margolis, he used to come in every Saturday and print all of his emails for the week just to make sure that they were retained somewhere for history and for, in case there were any investigations or anything else. Like, that's the type of people who work there. And Barr spit on those people. I mean, he denigrated them publicly and said, I'm the attorney general. Why should I be bound by what, or listen to what some career folks think, as if he knew best. And, whenever he did stuff, he got it so wrong. Like, he summarized the Mueller report in a way that, if one of my students summarized a book that way or a legal case, I would think I would give them an F. He coddled the president's friends like Michael Flynn. And, most of all, an attorney general is supposed to protect us. And this is a guy who facilitated the tear gassing of Americans. An attorney general is supposed to protect the most vulnerable. And, in the last years, we've had an epidemic of police brutality against African Americans. What did this guy do? Nothing. If anything, he kind of fomented it. And so, this isn't political, because I think we could have had, and we've had, in the past, Republican attorneys general who've been extraordinarily good, but this guy was deeply political. He was wrong start to finish, and yeah, I think he goes down as the worst attorney general in our lifetimes, and as it's fitting because President Trump's going to go down as the worst president in our lifetimes. So I guess these two have managed to accomplish something in the end.
I'm curious. I mean, did he have the background? I know he was a corporate lawyer, I think at GTE, because I have a friend who worked there and knew him from her time there. And in terms of his background, was he a surprising choice for attorney general? I know this is kind of going backwards, but I'm just curious.
Well, it's a little complicated because he actually was attorney general briefly at the end of the George Bush, the first administration. And so, you would think ordinarily that would be the most qualified person, but he had a very brief stint then. His most notable thing then was engineering the Iran-Contra pardons, which he said he was most proud of, which is not exactly, I think, a high point for American history. But more importantly, I think something really happened to him between 1992 and 2018, or whenever, whenever he took the attorney generalship again. I think by all accounts, I talked to a bunch of people who worked for him with him the first time around at the Justice Department, and he was sane. He's not saying, the sanity is not his strong suit at this point. And you see it in so many different things that he does and says.
Sorry, we had the TV on, everyone. They said it's distracting. We turned it off. Sorry about that. They said the question showed my ignorance, but I don't think he did a lot of trial work, did he?
No, I mean, and again, I don't think you need that for an attorney general, but it really does help. It's not a precondition, but it really helps to have been a career prosecutor, because that is the lion's share of what the Justice Department does. And to understand that non-political, even-handed way that you make decisions when you have awesome power, I mean, literally the power to put people to death, to understand that calibration and balance is something that is really, really important. And this is an attorney general who's literally on his way out trying to rush federal execution after execution. He brought back the firing squad in order to kill people. I mean, this is cruel and unusual, to use the words of the Eighth Amendment.
Let's talk about what happens now. Before we talk about who Joe Biden may tap to be Attorney General, there's been conversation about Andrew Cuomo. Somebody suggested Preet. I don't know, Neil, would you want to do that job? The question is, you know, what kind of chaos could happen between now and then, and will he put somebody in there temporarily? Will it just sit vacant? I mean, what's the deal? Will it give the president more latitude in terms of pardons? Tell us what's on the agenda now.
Right. So he's already named a replacement who's the Deputy Attorney General, the number 2 person, whose name is Jeffrey Rosen, not to be confused with my brother-in-law, Jeffrey Rosen, who runs the National Constitution Center, a very different one.
Brother-in-law. In fact, I've been writing my memoir, and I just read a nice letter he wrote to me.
Oh, but this one, we don't know a lot about this Deputy Attorney General. We know a lot about Barr, which is he did a lot of terrible, destructive things, and this Deputy Attorney General didn't, by all accounts, try and stop him. But there is something to all these new reports in the New York Times and elsewhere that Trump was dissatisfied with Barr, that he wanted him to do stuff, and so he's been pushed out. So there must be some delta between the new Attorney General and the old one. We don't know what it is. And yeah, they can do a lot of destructive things even just in a few days, whether it's pardons or indicting people or issuing reports that tar and feather people. You know, who knows? I mean, with Trump, his vindictiveness and thirst for revenge is Shakespearean in nature. And so, yeah, I am worried about that. But come January 20th, if the Justice Department can make it till January 20th, it's a new day. And I have been here already. I've been getting calls tonight from career men and women at the department who are really worried about what these next 37 days are going to look like.
Someone just asked a question I wanted to ask. Can Barr be prosecuted for anything that he did during his tenure as Attorney General? Do you see that there are any prosecutable offenses? You there?
I think I've lost you for a bit, but I think you're asking, can Attorney General Barr be prosecuted? Was that the question?
He did. Do you see that? Do you envision that at all?
At least as I understand it, and of course we don't know because the Trump administration is so secretive and hides so much stuff. But so far we don't know that Barr has engaged in any crimes. He's engaged in the most appalling lapses of judgment imaginable, but appalling lapses of judgment are not criminal offenses. So far I know nothing to say that, and I really hope that there isn't, because that would be an incredibly sad day for the country. But it's being Attorney General doesn't give you some get out of jail free card. So, in theory, an Attorney General who breaks the law could be prosecuted.
So people are worried. And what does it mean for the pardon process? Can you specifically tell us, what has to happen for the? I mean, does the president have free reign in terms of who he pardons and how and why? And of course, the big question, which you and I have discussed a few times, is can he pardon himself? Does this make it easier for him?
Okay, so you talk about the pardon process, and there's like the normal pardon process, and then there's the Trump pardon process, which basically ends with the word Trump. I don't think there is a process. In the Trump administration, it's much more who you know and who your friends are, and which celebrity whispers in Trump's ear if it's not one of his political patrons or something like that. Mm-hmm. So in an ordinary administration, absolutely, the Attorney General, or at least the Deputy Attorney General, signs off on a pardon and says to the White House, we think this has merit. They talk to the prosecutors, read the file, and so on. In this White House, Trump just kind of does it and orders it done for his friends like Sheriff Joe Arpaio or Michael Flynn or whomever. So given that, he could do it anyway, and he's likely to. So, I don't think Barr was necessarily going to be the guy to stand up to the president and say you can't do something. Now, it is true, there is an old Attorney General opinion from 1974 that says a president cannot pardon himself. Barr could have said, I'm refusing to withdraw that opinion. Again, we're in totally the realm of speculation, but he could have said, I'm bound by that opinion and it's right. You can't be a judge in your own case or something. And then Trump said, well, then I'm going to fire you. That's at least theoretically possible. And then he can hope for a different attorney general to write a different thing. And by the way, this is exactly what happened in the travel ban. You might remember Trump rushes this crazy Muslim ban through on a Friday night. And then his acting attorney general at the time, Sally Yates, refused to enforce it, saying it's unconstitutional. So he then fires her and gets the replacement to enforce the Muslim ban. So same thing could happen here. Barr could, again, only theoretically, we know nothing to say this has actually happened, say, I'm not going to withdraw the opinion, letting a president not pardon himself. And then the replacement, he could be fired and the replacement could do the president's dirty work for him.
Interesting. By the way, we turned off the comments. Sometimes we actually get some really smart questions, but I know they're kind of distracting because we don't want to.
Also tell people if they tap his face, the comments will.
Yeah, if you guys tap Neil's face, which is, just tap his nice little mug, the comments will go down and they won't cover his face. So that's something that you can do. But I think I agree, they can be really distracting. Okay, let's talk about the next Attorney General, Neil. So what do you think? Andrew Cuomo, you mentioned Sally Yates. A lot of people think she would be a dynamite general. Nice to get a woman in that job, although we had Janet Reno, right? And I'm trying to think if there are other women. Oh,
Loretta Lynch.
Yeah, Loretta Lynch. So we've been pretty well represented in that department, but who do you think has a leg up? And somebody else said they wanted Preet to get that job, as I mentioned. So who do you think has a good chance of being named AG?
I don't have any special insight, honestly. I just read the papers like you, but I will say that, first of all, anyone is the most immense step up. I don't have the vocabulary to describe where we are and where we're going to go with any of those names. They're just incredible. And I do think that the virtue that Sally and Preet have is that they've been prosecutors at the Justice Department. They have exactly what I was saying Barr lacks, which is that appreciation for how, about how law enforcement decisions are made and the awesome power of prosecution is done. And both of them are, strong supporters for the career men and women there, which is really the lifeblood of the department. It doesn't work any other way, which is why we've seen it fall apart over the last 4 years. So, they each have their own strengths. If it were down to those two, and I don't know that it is, but Sally is an extraordinary communicator, very, her values are truly the country's values. And I would say that about Preet too. I just think she's maybe spoken a little more of it sometimes. But, and Preet has an immense background in prosecuting financial crimes and so on. And, right now, given some of the looting that's been going on, I think that could be extraordinarily helpful. So I would be ecstatic for either of them.
I noticed you didn't mention Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, well, I just don't know much about Cuomo. I can't imagine that he'd go from the governorship of New York to the attorney generalship, but maybe he will. I don't think he knows the department and has served there. So, those are concerns that I've had. But again, that's just mostly out of ignorance. I just don't know a lot about him, whereas the other two I've actually worked closely with. And so I've seen them firsthand make tough decisions, and they do it in exactly the way I want, which is like, not about politics, not about revenge or helping your friends or hurting your enemies. Just what is the darn law? Justice is blindfolded in the statutes. These people have doled it out basically that way in the past. And so I just think it speaks well of them.
The career lawyers at the Justice Department must be doing a happy dance, huh?
Well, they are, except as I say, though, I'm getting calls tonight about these next 37 days. But after that, yeah, I think the department's gone through a lot. It went through a lot in Nixon. The firing of the 8 U.S. attorneys by George W. Bush was tough, but nothing compared to the relentless assault on the rule of law that has happened at the department, and making career men and women part of that process and making them stand up in court and defend astronomically silly things. So that's going to end regardless of who Biden picks.
Before we go, Neil, and I'm going to let you go because I know you got stuff to do, as do I, but what is the status on some of these criminal investigations into Donald Trump's either tax activities or real estate or whatever. Can you just give us a quick update? Do you have any clues from Cy Vance or anyone else?
So in our system, there's both state, local, and federal prosecutions and federal investigations and state ones. We know that the local state one or Manhattan one is pretty far along. That involves tax evasion by the Trump organization, maybe financial misdealings. The New York Times reported last week that that investigation has heated up a lot, and people from Deutsche Bank, the president's lender, have been interviewed by investigators and the like. That's also one that the president has never been able to stop because he doesn't control any part of the local prosecution power. And that was part of the wisdom of our founders. They thought if a federal official is corrupt, well, then we can have a state official go after, and vice versa. If a state official is corrupt, we can have a federal go after. You can't, that person, it's very hard to interfere with those investigations because they're cross-jurisdictional. So the New York one looks pretty significant and far along. We also know that there's a federal investigation that had been going on for a long time. This is the one that labeled Donald Trump individual number one. It involved Michael Cohen, payments to Stormy Daniels. It's kind of like to sound like Stefan on Saturday Night Live, but it had everything in it. In any event, that one appears to mysteriously have stopped when Attorney General Barr became, when Barr became Attorney General, and I'm quite sure it didn't stop because Barr looked into the facts and said, oh, there's nothing here. It can be picked back up, at any time. And so, even if they try and close that file, they might have a new head of the Justice Department, the new Southern District of New York attorney can look at it and pick it back up.
Right. Okay. So to be continued, but that you say the New York City one is heated up?
Yeah, according to the New York Times, again, I don't know anything beyond what I've read in the papers, but the papers do suggest that investigation is heated up, and it is pretty significant. I mean, even if you just start at the $130,000 that Trump deducted as a business expense, according to the reports, his payment to Stormy Daniels, that's where, that's embezzling effectively $60,000 from the federal government. And, if you or I did that, I think I know where we'd be looking at through bars. And so, that's a lot of money. And so, and that's just what looks like the tip of the iceberg, because we do know this, Katie. Cy Vance filed papers in the United States Supreme Court that said the investigation's much broader than just that one transaction. And so, to be continued, but it's looking interesting.
I forgot to ask my daughter's question. Carrie Monahan wanted to know on January 6th, when Congress, I guess, verifies the Electoral College votes, right? And they can actually challenge the results in one or more states. I think it was done in 2004 and 2016, according to my daughter. Will that have, did I get it right, Carrie? Will that have any significance, and could that be another hiccup to that might create an obstacle or barrier for Joe Biden on January 20th? And or is this out of your wheelhouse?
Totally in my wheelhouse. And in fact, tonight on Courtside on my Instagram stories that I do every night, I'm going to talk about exactly this. And the answer to your daughter, and it's a fabulous question, is that January 6th is not going to do anything to undo the results of the election on November 3rd. So on January 6th, all those electoral votes that we heard about today and live streamed and all that, they get shipped off to Congress and they're opened. And yes, there's a procedure to challenge that and to say that's not actually the right vote or something like that. But the most important thing, there's only one thing you need to know, which is the Electoral Count Act of 1887 explains what's to happen if there is a challenge. And it says that both the House and the Senate have to jointly agree to disqualify a single state or more states than one. So
Right.
The House and Senate have to agree. The House is controlled by Democrats. There's no way, even though there are 126 crazy members of the House of Representatives right now, Republicans who are acting basically seditiously and filing these crazy lawsuits. But, that doesn't matter. That does not a majority make. And they don't,
Are you saying that if the House was controlled by Republicans and the Senate was, it's conceivable that Congress could challenge the results in one or more states and ergo could upturn the whole election results? And if so, what the hell, Neil?
Yes. Our founders, they did say, people aren't angels and you have to control them with checks and balances. But fundamentally, Katie, they did depend on some good faith by people. And they said, just because someone's of a certain political persuasion or whatever, they just thought they would ultimately do the right thing. And for most of American history, that has been what happened. And then you've got this guy who literally torches those values. And so, yeah, things don't make a lot of sense. Our founders also gave the prosecution power totally to the president, so he could go after essentially anyone. And yeah, they'd have to be convicted, but prosecuting someone is hell on them. And he could have done that to all of his enemies. He was too incompetent to really pull it off. I think he tried, but he could. And it also gives the president the full pardon power to pardon anyone, which he's used willy-nilly to pardon his friends. So they assumed some good faith. And this president, of course, has spit on that concept of good faith. But, in future presidencies, I think we should generally be all right. And then there's the question, do we need some sort of systemic reform? Because once someone does it once, it's hard not to do again.
I was going to say, will this prompt some legislation, some restrictions on the executive branch so that in the event this happens again and someone tries to really push the envelope, and that's putting it nicely and mildly, that he or she would not have as much leeway to do so? And do you think that that's necessary?
Right, I do, and we're starting to develop, my group is starting to develop some legislation. The problem is a lot of this is constitutional in nature, and you need a constitutional amendment actually to do, like the pardon power, the prosecution power. So, but there are a lot of other things you can do, and at least you can shine sunlight and make sure that good decisions are made, and you can try and have the House and Senate use their spending power sometimes to try and rein in presidents. So there are things you can do that we're not doing right now, but some of it is going to require an amendment. And, it goes all the way back to the Electoral College, which is totally anachronistic at this point and requires an amendment too.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty to talk about on courtside.
Yes.
So,
well,
it's always great to get your perspective. If anybody wants to sign up for Wake Up Call, my daily newsletter, will be putting a link to this conversation if you want to share it with anyone, and you can check my Instagram feed. We're going to preserve this if anybody couldn't join us live. Go to katiecouric.com to sign up for my newsletter. Neil, I know you're enjoying reading it every day. Our motto is open it even if you don't read it. I'm kidding. Read it. If you guys like what you see, subscribe right here.